Welcome back to TV Tangents. Today we are discussing Who's the Boss, the 1980s sitcom that was a little too hot for TV.
Fan myself watching this show.
I know, right? It's a good thing I have all these papers.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, welcome back. For the second week, we're talking about Who's the Boss?
Who's the Boss?
Starring Judith Light and Tony Danza and those other people.
Those other people. We got all excited the last episode because we love this so much. We have to keep going because it is so good.
Before we move on, let's just talk about the cast real quick.
Yeah.
This is my brief rundown because I was so sleepy when I was making my notes. I don't know what was wrong with me. I don't know. Like I said, I was dehydrated. I don't know.
I'm telling you too, like when I write notes about shows that we watch, I'm like, I can tell when I don't have that many notes is because I got way too into the show.
Right?
Where then I was like not making any notes because I was so enthralled. And so I was like, oh my God, my notes are so boring.
By the way, if you're planning on watching all of Who's the Boss, we're going to spoil everything in this
Don't
episode
listen
right
to
here.
our episodes because we're going to ruin everything.
But I mean, still do because whatever. Anyway, so let's talk about the cast.
Okay.
What I'm saying is I have very brief notes.
Yes.
So Tony Danza plays Tony Maselli. Tony Danza was a professional boxer. Mm-hmm. He was born in Brooklyn. He was 33 years old when this show premiered. Mm-hmm. And he was previously known for Taxi. Yes. Did you ever watch Taxi?
I have not yet watched
well,
Taxi.
we're gonna because I'm already in season 3. So.
Oh, well, hey. Well, I was kind of thinking between that and Step by Step. We're going to have to start watching.
Right? Oh, I was thinking Step by Step. But I don't know how many seasons Taxi is, but I don't know. Anyway.
I think it's 6. Would be good.
So what are your thoughts on Tony Danza?
Oh,
what else have you seen him in?
To be honest, I feel like nothing. I don't, it just, but I think we discussed this in our last episode. Tony Danza is Tony Danza. He's recognizable. Mm-hmm. And I watched this show as a kid, and now, as you just said, he was 33 when this started. I'm currently 46, and I know that he's super short, but I was literally watching this like, hey, how you doing?
I'm like, give me some Tony Danza.
So yeah, he's super cute and super just, oh my God, I love you. I want to hang out with you.
And he's the ideal man in the beginning of the
really
series.
He
He's
really
like,
is.
I will clean your house. Okay, that's the dream.
He's cleaning the house. He's like all kinds of like buff and cute, whatever. At one point, she tells somebody else he has a cute little fanny. Yeah, I just love him. He's so cute. And to be honest, his character here too, we're getting into more like the plot lines, but I never knew how much he throws tantrums. And it's kind of in the beginning, I was like, what? But then it became like a thing and it was kind of funny. I don't want to go. Yes. He would really throw full on tantrums. And
but
it
in
was
the
kind
end,
of funny.
Angela was like, maybe Tony's tantrums are a little too much for me.
Yeah.
When she meets his doppelganger.
Yeah, but they played that up a little for that too.
But
because
then they were like, okay, but also you do that too. So that's when she realizes, oh, maybe we're meant for each other.
Exactly. And then she was bored with the boring guy. So she was like,
but Tony Danza's physical comedy is hilarious.
Yeah.
Like from day one, it's hilarious. It's not campy.
No.
It's funny.
He, I do want to say this too. And was it, we talked before about Billy, that was the cousin Oliver. Mm-hmm. And they were talking
little kid
about
Billy that they adopted for no reason.
The, psychologist person said how to use positive, feedback when you're disciplining. Mm-hmm. And they were like, how do you say to someone, you can't park here, or no parking, in a positive way? Mm-hmm. And they're teaching the kid that. And they were like, you can't park here. No, you said can't. No, you can't, whatever. And so nobody got it. And they're like, park elsewhere. So then it's positive. And then when they come home, Billy is using a broom to try to get something off the mantle of the fireplace. And he's like sticking it, like he's going to break something. And they come running in. No, don't do it. Broom elsewhere. And that's another thing I remember from my childhood. So like I will always remember that. So you're right. Like the funny little things and just some of the stuff that was like the way they delivered it. And when you're saying that, I mean, just, I don't even know. Tony's great. And I always forget some of these actors who, when you don't see them in a lot of other things, how good they are. So, yeah.
Then Judith Light plays Angela Robinson Bauer. She was 35. So she's 2 years older than Tony. Okay, this is a thing that comes up later when they're talking about how they were at camp.
Yeah.
And they were each other's first kiss at camp. And he's like, you didn't know that I was 11.
11, yeah.
Well, how would she not know? I mean, she wouldn't have known then. But the whole thing is where he's like, I have a secret to tell you. When you were 13, I was only 11. Well, yeah, duh, because we already know you're 2 years apart anyway.
Right.
Like, she already knows how old you are. She didn't at the time.
But did they know that as they became adult friends?
Well, they would have to. She's his employer.
Yeah, but there was a couple times where she had a birthday and he was like, and how many candles go on there? Like he acted like he didn't know how old she was.
I don't know.
So I don't know.
I thought that was really weird. I was like, I think you guys are best friends. You know how old the other one is.
Yeah.
So Judith Light was born in Trenton, New Jersey, and her mom was a model and her dad was an accountant. Like, she's gorgeous. Of course her mom was a model. She's beautiful. And when I was a kid, I just remember her being the mom. Like the stuffy mom.
Yeah.
Who's like uptight and has big hair.
And she dresses a lot of times in very like conservative but big 80s clothing that doesn't do her justice. And then all of a sudden she's going out and you're like, girl.
Her?
That gold dress that she wore at the beginning of like whatever, season 7 or something. I was like, Angela. Or like the dress she wore when they were like in Mexico that was off the shoulders and so cute. I'm like, girl, you need to dress like this all the time.
Her clothes were always expensive no matter what they were.
Well, and she did talk about shopping all the time and she had very expensive taste. But she wore like and I guess 80s style, of course, too. But like the big shoulder padded suit style skirt sets kind of thing.
Or like really drapey blouses.
Yeah, kind of always just like covered her up a little bit. But yeah, just beautiful and super. I mean, she's just like super thin, super gorgeous. Like, yeah.
And she's such a good actor. She married Robert Desiderio. I don't know how to say his name. In 1985, and they are still married. Although they do live in different cities.
Oh, well, there you go.
But she says that's the secret to a happy marriage.
I think it probably is.
I'm like, okay,
that's a good idea.
If that works for you. And she's big on LGBTQ activism and AIDS awareness and all of that stuff. And she's been in a lot of shows and TV movies.
She is... So, of course, I always knew that she was on Who's the Boss. She plays a district attorney on Law and Order SVU for years and years and years, named Liz. And it's so funny to see her over the time. And her hair is like shorter, of course. And she's just but she's very like kind of the same, she's like kind of a stricter person. But like, yeah, love her.
I'm not sure I understand.
Oh, Siri, nobody's talking to you. And then, spoiler alert, she is in the Dallas reboot.
Oh, geez, she is?
She sure is. So, yeah.
Well, now I guess I have to watch it.
So when we watch that, you'll get to see her on there, too.
Well, she's great.
It's very interesting, too. But anyway, so yeah, love Judith Light.
She's wonderful.
I mean, I think as a kid, I just thought, oh, yeah, she's kind of momish.
Oh, definitely didn't appreciate her then.
And then now as you're older, you're like, oh, look at her go. She's so... Love her.
I think her best hair moment... Because her hair was huge.
Her hair was
But
huge.
I think her best hair moment was when they got caught in the rain. And she had just like a layered...
kind of natural wet curls.
There's a name for it now. I forget what it is. But like it was just like kind of layered and awesome. That was a good hair moment.
Yeah.
Anyway.
A couple different times like that. I was like, oh, she's so cool.
She's beautiful.
Love her.
So we have Alyssa Milano, who, if you were not around in the 80s, Alyssa Milano was the girl that every girl wanted to be.
True that.
Before DJ Tanner, there was Samantha Maselli, and she was awesome. She was born in Brooklyn also in 1972. I don't know why I remember this from long ago, like probably in the 90s. She did an interview where she said that the stairs in the house were so steep.
They look super steep.
So steep. She said every time they would make her run down them all the time because she was always like coming in full speed.
As the kids, yeah.
And she was deathly afraid of these stairs and thought she was going to fall down them. So this time around watching it, every time she ran down the stairs, I was like, oh my God, that poor girl is afraid of those stairs.
Yeah. They look super steep anyway. Yeah. So knowing that
they had
is
to
interesting.
fit them into the set.
Yeah. That's interesting.
But yeah, she was like who everyone wanted to be.
Yeah, she was on all the magazines when we were growing up. And our next door neighbor had a friend growing up who looked just like Alyssa Milano. And to this day, I remember that. And I was just like, but we all kind of like learned, and watching this again, I was watching like her fashion change as she got older. And I was like, oh, how funny when we did that. When we had like those socks, we did that to our jeans, and we wore those kind of shirts, and then our bangs were tall like that. And it's just like, we knew that because she's pretty much like pretty close to our age. And we're like, yep.
I mean, I wore hand-me-downs, but when I watch this, I'm like, oh yeah, that's what I wanted to be wearing. Those are the shorts. Those are the shoes. That's like the hair. And it's funny because in episodes where she's like in middle school and high school, that her and her friends, which includes Nicole Eggert, they talk about the popular girls, and then they show the popular girls, and you're like, really?
Yeah. I'm like,
really?
Those are the popular girls? Yeah,
because
exactly.
Alyssa Milano. Yeah. Okay. Nicole Eggert.
You are by far the popular girls.
But I digress. So now we have Danny Pintauro as Jonathan Bauer, and he was born in Milltown, New Jersey in 1976.
Yes.
And I think like early 1976. So he was 7 when they filmed the pilot. He started his career on As the World Turns in 1982.
Oh, wow.
Which is what my grandparents watched. And recently, he was a vet tech in Austin, Texas, where he lived with his husband. But he did return to acting in 1922?
1922?
No.
Sweet.
We're drinking wine again, by the way, folks.
Yeah.
2022, he returned to acting.
I haven't seen him this is the only thing I knew him from, and I knew, that happens a lot, though. I mean, I think with a lot of kids in our childhood that grew up in the 80s or different things, or they probably went on to things that I never paid attention to. A lot of people go to Broadway and do different things, too, or they end up on shows that maybe I've never seen.
I mean, he went through addiction. I think he was like accidentally outed.
I was going to say,
show.
I read somewhere that he was outed in like 97 by someone else when he wasn't ready. And I'm like, oh.
Yeah. So, I mean, that happens all the time with child actors and whatever. But he seems to be doing well now. He had a recent fallout with Candace Cameron.
Oh.
Because she had interviewed him and made him feel very uncomfortable in the interview because he's HIV positive.
Oh,
and so she was like, well, do you take responsibility for your diagnosis? And he's like, excuse me? And she was like, I mean...
Interesting.
And she kind of called him out and made it weird. And he was like, basically like, she needs to get over herself.
Yeah. Interesting.
She's been really weird lately.
She was on Who's the Boss?
She was.
Did you see that?
She played
young
Mona. She did. She did. Katherine Helmond plays Mona Robinson, and she was born in Galveston, Texas. She started on stage in New York in the 50s, and she passed away in 2019.
2019, yep.
And she was just gorgeous.
I loved her so much. Like, I think we discussed this in the last episode. I always thought she was older because she's grandma.
Right.
So you never, and again, when we're kids, everything's age is so relative. And now that we're older, we get it. And it's like when this show started, she was 55. And I'm like, oh man, she's so beautiful. She's like the person you want to be. She's just so vivacious. She loves life.
And her outfits are amazing.
Oh my God. Other than the fact that I wrote down that she wore that same pink sweater with the pearls on multiple episodes.
That's funny. I noticed that too.
Right? I'm like, that's odd because you don't see that in sitcoms or shows at all.
But good on them.
Yeah.
To recycle a wardrobe. Because
that was great.
She wore it in 2 episodes in a row at one point.
And then it was multiple enough for me to say something about it. In my notes about it. I was like, oh, that's interesting. So,
but sometimes I was like, I want to be wearing what Mona's wearing.
Yeah, she was, great. And I loved everything about her was so funny. And, at one point when she was dating a younger man, who played, what's his name? Almanzo or whatever on Little House on the Prairie. I can't think of that guy's name in real life. He is dating her. And of course he's super young. He's like in her class in like the college classes. And they're dating. And then she comes home and she's like, I've been pinned. And she goes to show her pin off. And they're like, oh, it fell off. They're all on the floor looking for it. And Jonathan's like, I found it. It's on her back.
That was the greatest moment.
They had been making out in the car, obviously. And so everybody was like, all the adults were like, oh my God.
It's one of those moments where you can do the joke because we have no idea what you're talking about as children.
And aren't you thinking at that point, Danny Pintauro was probably like 7, and he was probably like, okay, so I just find this pin on her back?
Right,
like, again, I don't understand.
Right? Oh,
that was great. And I have to say at that point too, we talked last time about how like Tony and Mona were like besties kind of. Well, Tony though was also like her dad. Because she would say things, he'd be like, Mona, and he'd like give her that look like not in front of the kids. Like he would be like, or not to say anything ever when she'd want to make like sexual innuendos.
Right.
And so just funny. God, she's so funny.
And sometimes because she was kind of Sam's grandma too.
Yeah.
And sometimes she was like the not grandma because she'd be like, she'd be like, oh, you're leaving? Take the boy with you. She's like, just give me some peace and quiet.
Well, because when they were young, she'd be like, oh, let me take the kids. You two have a discussion.
Yeah.
Like, or when they were really little. And then, later on, she'd be like pawning Jonathan off on Sam and being like, oh, here, do this. And having little discussions. And at one point, she poses in like lingerie in a magazine. And Jonathan gets beat up at school. Like, they basically are like, your grandma is, And then he gets mad at her. And she's in his room. And he's like, why can't you just be a normal grandma? And then, of course, later it's all like, well, I was just kidding. Sorry. Like,
because that's a normal grandma now. That was not a normal grandma in the 80s.
Exactly.
I think that we all are who are becoming grandmas now. That's not me.
No.
We now are like, well, that's the grandma that we saw on TV. That's who we're going to be.
Yeah. Good on you, Katherine Helmond. You set the example for those of us that are all this age. And
you are the mentor for the grandmas of the 2020s.
Yes. Those grandmas
wherever
in their 40s and 50s are going to be just like you.
Exactly. I love it. Oh, by the way, I don't know. This just popped into my head. Remember the car that Tony bought for Samantha?
Oh my God. The giant yellow boat.
What the hell? I was like, first I'm thinking, okay, it was this giant yellow boat and it had reflectors all on the side.
That he put on everywhere.
I know. At first I'm thinking, where did he find this ugly car with these reflectors all over it? But then he's like, I added all of these. He added multiple taillights on the trunk of the car. And I was like, wow.
Yes.
The ugliest car you've ever seen. Oh my God, that car was hideous.
Love it.
So let's talk about guest stars, and then we're going to talk about spinoffs.
I was like, there's thousands of guest stars.
Because I know that you pay attention to the guest stars, as did I. Yes. So I got a whole list. So you go first.
Oh, okay. So they have their neighbor, who's Diane Wilmington, and she's played by Delta Burke the first time, and then she's played by Mary Lou Henner the next time.
Yes.
And that's the same...
who was on Taxi.
Yes.
With Tony Danza.
I literally was like, okay, so she, she just played a neighbor, and of course they tried to steal Tony away, and he wasn't having any of that.
I love Mary Lou Henner.
I do too. We talked about Betty White. She shows up as like a journalist, and then of course when they are accidentally in bed together, she just happens to be there, and she's very
she's mean.
Who is she? She's her character on Mary Tyler Moore.
She is. It's not. Is it Suanne? Suanne Nivens.
Suanne Nivens.
Okay. It's Nivens. Is it Nivens?
Nivens. You're right. It's Nivens.
It doesn't matter. You guys know what we're talking about.
We know what we're talking about.
Betty White. She's awesome.
I do have to say that this was such an interesting thing to me that James Coco plays Sam's grandpa. So he's Tony's, wife's father. Yes. And he shows up as Sam's grandpa, and he's been in and out of like jail. He's kind of not a good guy. And he shows up, and then he's kind of in there a few times. And then at one point he ends up going back to jail. Well, then they have a whole episode where Sam was going to go see him, but he dies. Mm-hmm. Well, James Coco in real life died a day after that last episode that he was on Who's the Boss aired.
That's crazy.
And I was like, oh, that's so sad to me. Yeah.
So the next season they had the funeral for him because they were like, well.
And Sam was super like detached, and she was like, nobody talked to me and I don't care. And then she's like super sad that her dad would be the next person to die and leave her because her mom died and then her grandpa died. So she was all kind of stoic about it. So he was a good one. Don't know this guy's name in real life. Kaniki, from Greece, plays ball with Tony.
Jeff Conway.
Conway, that's right.
He's also from Taxi.
Yes. Oh, that's right. He is on Taxi, although I haven't seen it.
I really want to watch Taxi.
We did mention in a previous episode that Mary Lee Stone from Dallas.
Yeah. Fern Fitzgerald.
She's a doctor, by the way, on this show. She's a good friend of Angela's. So Fran Drescher shows up a couple times.
Yes.
And the first time she's a designer that Mona wants to hire. And then she was on later on too, right? Now I'm thinking,
we're going to talk about that.
And then when I saw her, it dawned on me how much the premise of Who's the Boss is a housekeeper moving in.
And you know
what?
what?
I was like, wait a minute, the nanny.
That's not an accident. Fran Drescher actually put some little Easter eggs in The Nanny referring back to Who's the Boss.
Now I want to watch The Nanny again.
Oh my gosh, I love The Nanny.
So I have to mention this guy because this is so interesting. John Capellos.
Okay.
He plays an ad executive guy that Angela deals with. If anybody knows who I'm talking about, John Capellos, he's the janitor in the Breakfast Club.
Yes.
Currently plays a character on Days of Our Lives named Constantine.
Oh.
And Constantine's been on for a few months so everybody knows, side note, tangent, how huge of a Days of Our Lives fan I am. We lost John Aniston over a year ago now. Mm-hmm. So he played Victor Kiriakis on Days of Our Lives. So now there's a plot story where this guy came in and is claiming to be a good friend of Victor's when it turns out they were kind of enemies. He's trying to move in on Victor's widow. So side note, he's played by John Capellos.
Okay.
So as I'm watching this happen one day, I was like, why does this guy look familiar? I'm going to look him up. And then I realized he's the guy from the Breakfast Club. So then he makes an appearance on Who's the Boss? And, and then my brain just explodes. Because I'm like, why does everybody I know end up in the same
Why is this happening?
Stuff?
This may be our fault.
Exactly. I think it is our fault. James Hong. He plays Mr. Ping, which is also a guy I believe that Angela's trying to get a... So I have the obscure people. He plays Hoshi the trainer from Friends. When Pete's trying to become the ultimate fighting champion. Frank Fontana from Murphy Brown, which is, his name is what? Joe Regabuto? He plays Tony's childhood rival, and then he's also the concierge at the hotel where Mona's brother is like taking over. So there was that whole story. Right. He had two different characters.
That's right, he did.
Which was interesting. Jeffrey, who's also a name I don't know in real life, was also on Murphy Brown, so that's where I remember him from. He was also, I think, engaged to Murphy Brown. Also, I wrote in here somewhere that Leslie Nielsen must have married everybody in the 80s because he marries Dorothy on Golden Girls, and he almost married Mona.
He almost married Mona. He was in 2 episodes.
Again, random, but I think his name, how you say it, is Tao Penglis. He plays Tony DeMiro on Days of Our Lives, but he played a fashion guy, Armando. There is a story, and this isn't actually the guy, but there's when Angela wanted to meet Jake the Snake from high school, because he was like the most dreamy guy ever. Yeah. He's still Jake the Snake, kind of like Chip Matthews.
I was going to say he's still Chip from high school.
And then Chip Matthews makes an appearance on Who's the Boss, and he runs his car into Sam, and they start dating. So there's that.
I know. I was like, isn't that Chip Matthews? The funny thing is, I saw Chip Matthews on something else recently that I was watching with my husband, and I was like, isn't that Chip Matthews? And he was like, who? And you're like, never mind.
Come on.
Natalie would understand.
Natalie would know. We mentioned that Candace Cameron plays a young Mona when they have a flashback scene. And that's when she's talking about her relationship with her brother. And then, of course, Frankie/Francesca, who is from Brooklyn, when she has the gelato booth, is played by none other than Christian Alfonso, who is the beautiful and talented Hope Brady on Days of Our Lives. And she is all about Tony. And she bids on him to be her housekeeper when Angela and her are going back and forth. And it's like, oh, how
This
you
is
doing?
another thing that has happened in every sitcom.
She pays $1,000 to have Tony
Yes.
come to her house for the weekend to be her quote unquote housekeeper. And it's all bizarre. And she proposes to him,
Yeah.
by the way. And he says no.
I mean, why wouldn't you? He's going to clean your house
I was
and
like,
he's muscly.
how does
so.
that happen?
She also was on every sitcom in the 80s.
Yeah, she really was. She was on lots of stuff. Well, because, I could run down the timeline for you for when she left Days of Our Lives, but we won't do that now. Tony has a date with a girl named Judy, who was Jennifer Holmes, who played Leslie on Newhart, who was only on there for 2 seasons. I was trying to figure out who she was. Judy Geller, Christina Pickles,
Yes.
was Mona's brother's widow. No, she was already passed.
she was dead.
She was passed.
And she was Mona's sister-in-law, which I guess Mona has 2 brothers.
I think so.
And so
And
she wasn't speaking to this one.
Yeah, she hated this. Judy Geller, Christina hated Mona.
Yeah. So
And
she
tried
had
to
to
keep them
get
apart,
she
yeah.
had to get Mona to forgive her brother. So she had to go through Tony as an angel or whatever. It was a Christmas episode.
Yeah, it was a Christmas episode.
Yeah.
Always. Jonathan Brandis, who we talked about in the Kid 90 documentary, played a kid in Jonathan's class. I just happened to see him in there. Leanne Hunley, she played a ski teacher at when Tony and Sam went off to ski together. She's on Days of Our Lives, in case you were wondering. Chandler's boss, the crazy boss that hits everybody on the butt, moves in next to them in season 5.
He's in everything.
And they have a problem with the property line, and
To this day, he's in everything.
he is and everything. And their daughter was played by Heather Tom, and I think she was on The Young and the Restless. Harv Smithfield from Dallas plays Tony's grandpa.
Yeah.
George Petrie in real life, for those of you who don't watch Dallas or whatever.
Who doesn't watch Dallas?
I know, nobody.
14 seasons.
Patrick Muldoon was Sam's boyfriend in New Mexico when she moved to New Mexico. Patrick Muldoon played Austin Reed on Days of Our Lives.
Are there any non
Is it? I mean, can I not have any? Jane Leaves. Am I saying that right? Daphne on Frasier.
Yeah.
She was Billy's teacher. Mm-hmm. William Ute was Tony's agent in his dream about if he had been, if he had made it big and in the big leagues or whatever. Mm-hmm. By the way, he plays Dr. Rolf on Days of Our Lives, but he was also a huge character on Night Court, which I believe we talked about him in our Night Court episode. And I did have to mention that both Willie and the daughter on Alf both make appearances on Who's the Boss. I can't think of what her name is, but she plays Sam's roommate. And I mean, I'm pretty sure that was all I had.
Her other roommate.
I just scanned my my stuff. And
Not her roommate, Matthew Perry.
No, oh, he's in there too. How did I miss that? I read that earlier today. Yeah, no, Matthew Perry was her roommate's fiance, right?
Yeah.
And he fell in love with her.
But then, the other fiance, the female fiance, moved out, and Tony was like, "You can't live with a boy."
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah.
And they're
which
like,
is
"Oh, it's
funny
fine."
because he's living with Angela, but that's fine.
Yeah.
Other guest stars include Peter Billingsley from A Christmas Story.
Oh.
Was Sam had a crush on him. It was in an early season, and they were playing baseball together, and she had a crush on him. And are you okay?
Sorry.
Garrett Morris from Saturday Night Live. Let's see. Rhoda why can't I pronounce people's names?
Yeah.
Geminani played Mrs. Rossini. She
Okay.
is a actor in lots of things.
Why did I think she's in everything? But then when
She
I looked
is
it
in
up,
everything.
it felt like.
Well, she did play Jesse's mom Irene in season 1 of Full House.
That's right.
But only one time.
Okay.
She also was in an episode of Newhart where she played Miss Rossi.
Oh, okay.
I mean, she's been in a lot
Well,
of
no
things.
wonder. So
She's
then
all
I
over.
recognize her, but
Yeah.
not like something where it's like, oh, it's all this.
And then we have Frank Sinatra as himself.
Of course.
Wolfgang Puck as himself. Ed McManus himself. Mike Tyson as himself.
Yes.
Robert Culp from The Greatest American Hero.
Oh.
Ray Charles plays himself. Did I say that already?
No.
Rita Wilson was in there for a minute.
Oh, that's right.
Let's see. Marsha Cross was in.
Am I the queen of random characters that no one knows about from like Days of Our Lives?
I saw a soap opera one time, and that's who this is.
You're
and
like,
everybody's
okay.
like, we don't watch
We don't know who that is.
That's fine. I have to mention, Chad in 2 episodes was Sam's boyfriend, and he was played by Scott Grimes, who I only know him because he was in all the teen magazines.
Okay, I thought so too, and I never looked him up, but I was like, why is he familiar also?
Because I knew everyone in the teen magazines in the 80s. Because I would beg my mom to get me some from the grocery store, and she would when she could.
And we hung them up on our walls.
Yeah,
I mean,
hung everybody on our walls. He's currently in the series Ted, about a talking teddy bear.
Oh,
I don't know. I haven't seen it.
I've heard of it, but yeah.
But anyway, yeah, those are the guest stars that I...
Well, we had mentioned maybe in last episode, Nicole Eggert.
Nicole Eggert is
Sam's friend. Marcy.
I don't know.
Marcy. Early on, and then she disappears. And then what's her name? Still her friend for years or whatever. But Nicole Eggert had moved on to other shows and
Charles
stuff.
in Charge.
Yeah. So she was on, but lots of people throughout this that were just kind of... that I could recognize from other places. So
and then we have 3 what they call backdoor spinoffs.
Okay. Yes.
And I mean, it makes me think of things, including how many back doors the house that they live in has.
Yes.
Like 3 back doors, but that's fine. The first spinoff was called Charmed Lives. And that was, it's so funny when I was watching the series, I recognized every single time there was a spinoff, I was like, I've seen this show. And also you can tell because they're not centering on the main cast.
Yeah.
They're talking about these other people that don't make any sense.
Right.
So the final episode of season 2 is called Charmed Lives, and it serves as the pilot episode for the 1986 short-lived spinoff starring Fran Drescher and Donna Dixon, who is married to Dan Aykroyd, by the way.
Okay.
And that was kind of like it was just odd. Like it didn't fit into the series at all.
Yeah.
And that series didn't really go anywhere. So, no. Like Donna Dixon was like, I don't want to be a model.
Well, okay.
Okay. And then we had the Mona spinoff.
Oh.
Which for some reason, the network thought, let's get rid of the coolest character in the whole show and give her her own show. So in season 3, it was 1987, Mona moved to New York. That's that's the episode where she runs the hotel with her brother.
Okay.
Her other brother.
Right.
This was the pilot.
Yeah.
But the episode starts with the dream sequence where Candace Cameron is little Mona. And this was the same year that Candace Cameron had a guest spot on Growing Pains and then she started on Full House.
Interesting.
So we meet her brother Cornelius, who's like a retired military officer who just like bought a hotel with his and Mona's savings.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, I guess I better stay here. And that's where Joe Rogabuto shows up, and he will later star in Murphy Brown. So her brother's played by James Seeking, who was on Hill Street Blues, and that series finale aired the same night as the Mona premiere.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that show premiered, immediately flopped.
Yeah.
Because, first of all,
Didn't even know.
We want Mona.
Right.
And it didn't even flop. It was like, they were like, we're not going to do this.
Yeah.
They just like changed their minds.
So like, never mind.
So then in the next episode, because now Mona's moved out.
Mona moved out. Tony moved into her apartment.
And he had a party.
Which was the dumbest. That was by far the dumbest episode ever.
It was so weird.
So if that's the premise of the fact that they tried to start another show, then yes, dumb.
I feel like, because at the end of the episode, Mona moved back in.
Right.
So I feel like did they film this episode and then tack that on at the end? Because at the very end, she's like, never mind. Or did they film the episode to gloss over the whole failed spin-off thing?
Right.
I don't know. All I know is they fixed it
Yeah.
with the last episode of the season.
I didn't even know that was the plan, that she was going to go. Because I was kind of like, yeah. That whole thing when he moved in there anyway, it was just so dumb because it was like, why would you move out of the house when you guys hang out?
I don't know,
And
I
it
kind of
just
felt like that was a better place for him to live, to like have his own place.
But at that point.
But then he was worried. He's like,
right. But at that point,
know.
they were in a weird place where they were
Yeah.
like, that's not what I'm doing anymore. We're kind of like moving into this like phase, the unspoken phase of being together, but not really being together.
I have to say, good on this show for like keeping it a family show, because they never, even in season 8, when they were officially together, they still had their own rooms.
Yeah. And he said to her in Jamaica, so they had their little fake fight in Jamaica because they weren't spending enough time together. And then they had like their whole like competition thing when they were dancing. It was weird. Well, then they were sitting together on a bench. And then that was when they all of a sudden had like a really severe hot makeout session. And then they were both like, no, whatever. And he said to her, we would have to be married for this to happen. He said that at that point. And I was like, interesting. So is it that like, you respect her so much that you think that's the answer? Mm-hmm. Although I'm kind of thinking if you started to actually quote unquote date, then you maybe get to that phase. But yeah, they never did.
But also like Jonathan's about to graduate from high school and Samantha's in college. Samantha's married.
Yeah.
So like, but network censors. So
yeah.
I mean, I'm sure the network would have been like, nah. Yeah. But that's what we're talking about, spinoffs. Yeah. So the third spinoff was Living Dolls, which is a show that I watched.
Oh.
And I was extremely disappointed when it was canceled. I actually watched it because I saw the Who's the Boss episode, and then they were like, and next is Living Dolls. So in season 5, episode number 115 was never shown during the series' original primetime run. It was shown.
Is that why it was confusing and out of order?
Yes.
The next year when they had another episode and they acted like they didn't know each other. Okay.
Yes.
That makes sense.
Because it was supposed to be the Living Dolls. It was supposed to introduce us to Living Dolls, but then they had a cast change. They got rid of Vivica A. Fox and replaced her with Halle Berry.
Oh, interesting.
So they did not air this episode until Who's the Boss was in syndication later.
Oh.
So,
very interesting. That's good to know. I was kind of wondering how that all happened. So
they replaced it with another episode called Life's a Ditch, which was episode 123. And I'm very confused about how all of this happened. I would have to take the time machine and figure it out. But I just remember I watched Who's the Boss. They were like introducing these characters and I was like, that's awesome. I want to watch that show. I watched it and it only lasted 12 episodes.
Oh.
But it was a good show. And it starred, what's her name? Leah Remini.
Leah Remini, yeah.
Yeah. And Halle Berry. And they were like models.
Yeah.
And
they
Leah
were like living in
was like
that lady Trish, who was friends with Angela, and I'm trying to think of what her name is in
Michael
real life.
Learned?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I can imagine that would have been a good show. So that's too bad that it didn't last.
It was good. So in the end, the last season, like the end of season 7, they officially get together, but then they don't want to tell anybody, which is weird because everybody already knows.
Well, I do have to mention this part where, so they, like I said, seasons 4 and 5 were a little bit like kind of boring. It seemed as like they had an understanding that they were just, gonna all be friends and that no one was dating anybody. And we were kind of in a relationship, but not in a relationship, which is also weird. Well then, so what was it? Season 6, maybe? I think at the very end of season 6. Tony's in school. He's going to college trying to get his degree. And his people come over to have a study group. Well, Angela has to have a presentation, so they go to a hotel. And Tony ends up spending the night with this other girl. And then he comes back the next day, and he's like wearing the same clothes, and then they kind of like play it off. And then there's just like a weird vibe, and Angela sees it between him and this girl. And they go in the kitchen, have a discussion, and she's like, maybe I'm crazy, but I just got this feeling, and he has this guilty look on his face. And they're both like, oh. So then that's when I think we're introduced to the big giant study at that point that's in the back. And they have this big discussion about how, like, they've never really discussed, and maybe this is where we need to go if our journey is going to be together. Mm-hmm. And I was, like, crushed. I'm like, what? He's with somebody else? I'm like, I'm so mad. And then they're, like, teary. I'm, of course, bawling, and they're, like, all teary and whatever. And he's just like, yeah, I don't know what to say. She's like, is it over? And he's like, I don't know. And I'm like, oh my God.
That's so what you were trying to avoid.
She leaves and then she like goes to answer the door and it's some guy who's like pitching something for her agency. And she goes out the door with him. And of course, Tony comes running out like he wants to say something to her. And she's walking out the door with the guy. Because of course, miscommunications.
Right.
Well, then at the beginning of season 7, they're dating other people. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I'm just like, no. How is this happening? Mm-hmm. So of course that happens. He breaks up with the girl. She ends up breaking up. And then they're back to the, now we're back to the way we were kind of thing. And then we get to like the beginning of season. Because they've had all these things. Like the vacations. Like, one day we'll get married. Well, mm-hmm. I hope so one day. Well, okay. And it's a bunch of unspoken weirdness. And I'm kind of like, the kids are older. Why? What are you waiting on?
And
what are you waiting
so
on?
Bad. Like every time... Like when Mona walks into the train car when they're like in the train bed together and she's like, whoa, yay!
She's like, finally!
Right. And then Samantha walks in and she's like, whoa.
Yeah.
And she's all happy. And then they're like, no, it's not what it looks like. Mm-hmm. The bunk bed is stuck. And then Mona like pulls it down.
And also during that episode, Angela's like, we're best friends. We can sleep in the same bed. And Tony the whole time, eyes wide awake, because he can't sleep next to Angela.
I know. He's like, are you wearing perfume? And she's like, no.
It's just my scent.
And he's like, yeah. So
very crazy.
So season 8, they get together.
Well, at the beginning, she's like, okay, I think it's time. And she gets a watch for their anniversary. And it says, I think it's time I tell you I love you.
All the misunderstanding. That was the end of season 7.
That whole episode was ridiculous. Because it's like she wants to give him the watch. Well, he gives her some ridiculous like seat covers. For
he did give her sheepskin or something seat covers.
And then they go to the carnival together as a family. Because it's everyone's anniversary. And she's like ready to be committed. Mm-hmm. And then pretty soon it's like they go to a psychic. And this lady's like, you know, like she's like telling the future. And he's like, no, I want things to stay exactly the way they are, exactly the same. And mm-hmm. Angela gets up and leaves and she's mad. And then this lady says something to him and she's like, it's about time and mm-hmm. saying you love someone. And then he finds Angela and she's like shooting the gun at the little thing or whatever.
Like, why was that a machine gun?
Yeah. And then she's all mad and like, he's like, well, I don't understand. He's like, he's being so clueless. And she slams the watch into his hand and says happy anniversary. And then
But also the psychic told him the last person you kiss today is you're going to be with for the rest of your life.
Yeah,
and then
tonight
some
by
nun
midnight.
Kisses him.
Yeah. And he's like freaking out and he finally finds her. They get caught on the swan ride.
Yes.
Or
the
whatever.
Of love.
And it's on and on and on. And he won't say it at first that he loves her. And that it's just like, and I will say too, there was an episode early on again. I have to go back to all the ones where, it was when she saw the therapist. Mm-hmm. And she said, I love him. And she's like, you should tell him. And they go to talk to each other and they're like in the living room. And she's like, there's something I need to tell you. And they're both like looking at each other. He's holding a laundry basket or whatever else. And they get interrupted. And then somebody says, quotes some poem. And they quote it wrong. And she says, no, it's love. It's like love is the best medicine mm-hmm. or something like that. And he goes, oh. Because she goes, it's love. And he's like, what is? And she goes, it's actually love is the, okay, whatever. And they're both, they're looking at each other and it's like they know it. And then towards the end, he's going to walk to the basement to do the laundry and he goes, are you sure it's love? And she goes, positive. And he's like, I'm going to cry. He's like, me too. And he walks away. And I'm like, I was so mad all the time. I'm like, you too.
But
you need to be smacked.
This is the good stuff.
It was.
These two actors have great chemistry.
That made you like, I can't even imagine if that would have been real time in the 80s and we would be our age now. We would have been dying.
We would have come to work and be like, Natalie, Did you watch Who's the Boss Last Night?
Can
you believe they're not
said
getting
they
back
loved
together?
each other, but they didn't really say they loved each other.
Because now we're watching it from the future, but we know that they're going to get together.
We already know, yeah. Although, I'm not going to lie, I had no idea how the ending, like, I had no idea how it ended.
That's true.
And so, to me, it was like, so they, obviously, he says he loves her. They're on the ride together, and they love each other, and whatever.
But also, they didn't know if season 8 was going to happen.
Right. And wasn't there also, when you watched it on streaming, they put episodes in a reverse order somehow. Because all of a sudden they were like, they had said this, and then it said next time on Who's the Boss, and then none of that stuff happened.
Yes.
And then the next episode was that one they said was going to happen.
They also had some incorrect descriptions on some of these.
Yes.
So, yes, that's true.
So they literally, like, at one point they were like, they tried to hide it from the rest of the family. So he's like, I don't want everybody to know.
Everyone wanted it to happen. Mona knows that they're in love with each other.
They're like,
why are you hiding it? Why?
And then they go sneak off and get into a car, which ends up in the lake somehow because they were trying to make out. And then the whole family shows up and they're standing there and they're like, well, we should tell him. And Tony's like, I love Angela. And they go, yeah?
Yeah.
And then he goes, no. He's like, and then they're both like, we're in love. And then all three of them, Sam, Jonathan, and Mona, what? Like they get, because of course they're like, well, duh, we know everybody loves each other. Because there's like the whole episode too where in her sleep, Angela's like making some sounds. And then the one night everybody hears her and she's like, Tony, I love you. And they're all in the hallway listening and they're like, oh
my God. The episode where I don't remember what was happening in the living room, but Mona was in the kitchen.
Yes.
And Angela was like, oh, Tony.
Yes. What were they doing?
I don't remember, but Angela's like, oh, thank God. I think it was when
they were doing something funny.
I don't remember. Yes. But yeah. And Mona's like, oh, finally.
Yeah. Oh, finally. They're together.
Right. But that's not what's happening.
So then they're super lovey-dovey. And it's kind of weird because it's like, then they're like a couple and it's like, just like every other show in the history of life. When the sexual tension ends, it's kind of boring.
Right. Like now what do we do? Because the kids are grown.
Yeah.
And what are we going to do? And so season 8 was kind of like, okay, we have to build a tension. Mm-hmm. So.
And they were planning a wedding-ish.
Yes. They were going to get married. Tony, had graduated from college and he couldn't find a job. And he was offered a job in Iowa.
Too, which is also weird. Yeah. So, yeah.
And so he moved to Iowa, and then she would come visit him, and
he gets a job. Iowa. That's basically like the last, 2 or 3 episodes. So he finally gets a job, and it's to coach and be a professor at a college in Iowa.
And it's a great job.
They're both like, what? So he goes there in the beginning, and then, of course, he loves it. He just loves it. So he's there for a while, and then they're like both coming back and forth to each other.
Which was awful.
And it was, and they were missing each other, and it was weird, and it was like always, and they were fighting. So the next thing you know, Angela moves there. And she's living there. She's like giving up her life. She's like, well, why wouldn't I ever, Jonathan's in school. Everything's fine. And she's all weird and like, I'm a farm lady now.
She's pretending like she loves it.
Yes.
And she's like, Mona comes
and trips her up. She's all like, oh, this one account. She's like, well, I can take the red eye and da-da-da-da-da-da. She goes, I was just kidding. I made that up. And so they're, whatever. She's being supportive. And then he wins some big game and whatever else. So they're in the room and then the guy comes in, the athletic director comes in and he's like, I'm tearing up your contract. And he's like, what? And he's like, no, I'm offering you a 3-year contract. And Angela's face is like, oh my God. So they realize, she's like, no, you have to stay. This is your dream and this is what works for you. Mm-hmm. And, but I need to go back. And they basically realize this isn't working.
Yes.
So she leaves and moves back. And then he's still in Iowa.
And getting an award.
They get an
for
award.
Teacher of the Year.
Yeah. And Sam shows up to be his person. He's like, oh, thanks for coming. And then, of course, Angela's miserable back in Connecticut and sobbing and just being around and being all sad, whatever. And then at the very end, she comes down the stairs in her bathrobe and her hair in a towel. Mm. And opens the door, and Tony's standing there in a tuxedo.
Still holding his award somehow.
And she's like, what are you doing here? And he's like, I heard you're looking for a housekeeper. And
he's like, do you always answer the door in a towel?
When you do job interviews, do you always talk like this? And he walks in, and they're talking, and he's just like, they're kind of dancing around it or whatever. And he's like, so, yeah, like something about being the housekeeper. And now they're basically like in each other's arms. And she's like, well, what are your qualifications? And she's like, oh, he got the job. And he's like, as if there was any doubt. So clearly they're together forever.
Right? Because we didn't know.
I had no idea. To be honest, I feel like this, even us talking about this for 2 full episodes, I'm like, doesn't even do it justice. I'm like, there's so much back and forth where
You gotta watch it. You gotta watch it. You guys will, like, if you watched Who's the Boss as a child, you do not know who's the boss.
You don't. And you have to watch it again if you only remember it from your childhood. And I'm kind of like, we need to, like, totally rewatch shows from the different perspective.
Yeah.
And I mean, seriously, like, I miss these guys so much. And I feel so pathetic even saying that. But I'm like, I will watch episodes in the evening. You know, I come home from work and I'll be like, I'm going to watch a few episodes of whatever we're watching. And I mean, every day I was literally like, I get to go see my friends, Tony and Angela. I mean, this show is so good. There weren't times. I can always judge it again by one, I have to pause the show if I go to do anything because I can't just have it on in the background. And it's great. Did you see the episode where Sam had to get a band to play for like a fundraiser or something in the I mean,
I didn't see it.
Okay, you obviously didn't see it because you would remember if you saw it because
I might have skipped around.
By the way, this is like in season 8 or something, and she's like becoming a promoter for like bands or something. So she's having some kind of was it a fundraiser? I can't even remember what it was. And now I can't even see my notes on it.
I know the episode you're talking about, but I did not watch it.
Okay, so it was going to be like Wilson Phillips is going to come perform. So somehow at the last minute, they like can't come. And Tony's like, the monkeys are available. It was the best.
They're always available.
The very beginning of my notes says, make sure Rebecca sees episode 23, season 7. And I'm like, dang it, I totally
thought
forgot.
I got all the important episodes. I really did.
And most of the whole time and everybody was like, what? And then at the end, like something else comes disappointing. He goes, well, the monkeys would have been here and that wouldn't have been. And I'm like, oh my God. It always comes back to the monkeys.
The thing is, it does. And the thing is, I saw that on like the list of episodes and I was like, I'm sure that's gotta be something important. And I was gonna go back to it because I was really trying to get done.
You're like, I gotta get through. Now he wants to watch it.
And then I was like, oh, I didn't get back to it. I'm sorry.
I should have said to you, oh, you have to watch this episode.
They wrapped it up fast, and they wrapped it up.
They did.
Knowing that they needed to.
Yeah.
Because they were ending the show, and then they knew that, like, it wasn't going to go on past that.
Yeah.
We weren't going to care when that tension was gone.
Yeah, and I liked it because it was like they were rebuilding her bedroom at one point, and they were kind of like, well, this is going to be our bedroom. But it was still, like, all of those things. And, yeah, this is one of those shows where they... You know, we've talked about that with Friends. Like, Ross and Rachel get together again at the end, but we don't see them back together.
Right.
And I think that's better.
This was also...
And it's kind of like that here.
This was also in... Okay, so they didn't want us to see them get married. Mm-hmm. They wanted to just leave that open, and that was also a thing in That Girl. Where they were engaged, but she, like Marlo Thomas, didn't want us to see her get married. Because she wanted to just leave it open. Like, that doesn't have to be the intention of this show. So that was the same thing in this series, is that they didn't want us to see that.
Yeah. Like this, it was like, that was technically, I mean, it seems like as if that was what they would be working towards the whole time. So I think it was like, you know, implicit, right? It needs to be implicit. I think that it was like, like they didn't need to show it to us because you're like, well, of course, they're going to be together. And then
they've already dreamed it anyway.
Exactly. They had so many dreams about things. She dreamed when she was in Brooklyn that she was pregnant with his baby, and they were like a Brooklyn couple. It was so cute. And it just really, I mean, you just knew it was going to work. And
it's happily ever after.
Yeah.
I miss it already.
I just can't. I'm
really
like, I
do.
don't want to give it up.
I don't want to give it up. I don't want
I
to stop
hate
watching.
when we get done with sitcoms and I have to give it up.
And then we go on to a next one, and we're like,
I
oh my
know.
God, I can't
I
give
know
it
this is
up.
the next one, exactly. Because I remember feeling like this over so many of the ones we've watched.
It's
and I'm
true.
Like, dang it.
It's true. Well,
So true.
what else do you have to say about Who's the Boss?
I mean, 100 things, like a ton, but I can't. I think we're probably done.
You guys just have to watch it. You just have to watch it.
Yeah.
I mean, whatever you remember about Who's the Boss, it's not not bad.
It'll blow your mind how it is different. And I actually mentioned that to a friend of mine who listens to our podcast, and she was like, I'll watch it, then I'll come on your podcast. I'm like, well, you probably won't watch it fast enough.
We need you tomorrow.
Yeah, I was like, and I said to her, I go, oh my God, show is so good. And she goes, oh yeah, I'm going to watch that. And so she gets it. Like, she'll be like, oh yeah, I remember that, and I'm going to watch it. And I'm just like, man, people really do. People our age, especially, if you watched it when you were growing up, watch it now, and it's totally different.
So different.
And you'll be like, it's so good. And I love when I feel like shows could be right now.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And there's so many of those shows I didn't even watch. I think we talked about that when we did Newhart. And we've talked about it where I'm like, that's not a show that couldn't be going on right now. And there was nothing about them that was, other than clothes and hair, nothing is like dated when we're, like, and so it just, watching it from a different perspective is so fun.
You know what's dated? Their kitchen.
The amount of stuff that's hanging on the walls in the kitchen and in the living room.
I was going to say the dust in that house.
I mean,
it's a good thing there's a housekeeper.
I was going to say no dust because there's a housekeeper.
I know, but like
she's got way too much stuff.
All the dusty surfaces, all the stones, all the fake plants, all the knickknacks.
So many things.
So many
too
things.
Way too many throw pillows on the couch. So thank God for Tony.
Yeah, not my favorite house in sitcom land, but
no,
yeah,
but a good one.
It was good.
Yeah,
it was good.
So, oh my gosh, all of y'all give us all the comments because I want to hear everybody's thoughts. On Who's the Boss because it's so good.
We want to hear it.
So don't say that you don't like it because we might revolt.
Right.
So good.
Right.
So good.
Okay. Well, drop us a line at tvtangents. What did I say? tvtangents@gmail.com. And find us on Patreon at patreon.com/tvtangents, where you can get like extra bonus stuff, and you can join for as little as $2 a month, and we've got all kinds of extras in there. Anyway, let's wrap this up.
Let's wrap. I don't want to.
Who's the boss?
All right, bye. Who's the boss?
Goodbye, Tony.
Angela.
Goodbye, Angela.
Angela, we love you. Wink, wink.